Hello everyone. My name is Sorcha Connellan and I'm a clinical psychologist with the Cancer Psychology Services in the University Hospital Limerick. And I want to thank Multiple Myeloma Ireland for the invitation to talk to you today about coping. So here's an overview of what I'm going to cover today. So we'll briefly run through some of the psychological and emotional responses to multiple myeloma. We look at recognizing and understanding why we become stressed. And then we'll focus more on the last one, which is living well and coping with stress. So all our lives we're balancing stress on the one hand and our coping on the other. And if you think of an image of a seesaw, at different stages in our lifespan, we experience different kinds of stressors. And then coping then is what we do to manage all of these demands. So it's quite unique, it's quite individual. So stress is part of being human. It's part of our humanity that we feel stressed when we're feeling threatened. And a little bit of stress isn't a problem. It can actually be really, really helpful. It's when we get overwhelmed or swamped by it that it can be more challenging, when it starts to get in the way of us living our lives. So on the physical side, there are a number of different things about myeloma that can make it challenging at times, and you'll be very familiar with these, so I won't spend time on that today. So there are the physical changes related to the illness itself, and also there are changes due to the side effects of treatment. So people are living in a changed body, and these changes can be temporary or permanent. And myeloma has an impact on our social systems, on our relationships, on roles and responsibilities. But what we're going to focus on today is the psychological and the emotional responses. So when there's a diagnosis of multiple myeloma, the main responses many people feel are fear, sadness, and anger. So we're hardwired to respond to threat with the fear response, and that includes things like anxiety, worry, panic. So fear is healthy, it's natural. And it's sometimes known as nature's protector. And at a very primal level, an illness threatens our well-being. So it's inevitable that our fear response will be triggered along the way. The problem arises when it gets out of control and there's an unhealthy fear. So when fear is triggered at a biological level, what happens is our nervous system can become over-aroused. We go into fight flight and our thoughts might start racing. And at a behaviour level, we might either avoid thinking about or discussing anything to do with what's frightening us, or we might Google compulsively and even intensify our fear. And many people will also then experience maybe sadness or low mood, grief, loneliness, remorse. And sadness is our healthy, natural response to loss in life. And a sense of loss can come with illness. So the loss of a previously clean bill of health, even, for example. And at a biological level, our nervous system can become under-aroused and we can withdraw and become inactive. The other emotion that can come up at times in different ways is anger. And anger can be felt as frustration, irritability, blame, rage, envy. And that is our normal response to things that happen to us that we experience as unfair or unjust. And at a biological level, anger leads to an over-arousal in our system. So its function is to correct a situation if we can. And these are all fear, anger, sadness. These are all healthy, normal responses to challenging situations. And you're probably very familiar already with fight or flight, so I won't go into it in much detail today, but just to mention briefly that this is a very powerful response. It's the response that happens when we get stressed, when we experience strong emotions like fear and anger, and it involves a whole cascade of physiological changes that are designed to help us cope with stress. with a threat. And sometimes these changes can feel very unpleasant, and they can trick us into thinking that there's an even bigger problem. So, for example, we might think we're having a heart attack when we notice our chest, our heart pounding in our chest, or we might believe we might be developing dementia when we have difficulty concentrating or remembering things. So what's really important to understand here is that when we're in this state, the thinking part of our brain can shut down and we can become overwhelmed or flooded. And it makes it very, very difficult to think clearly or to plan or to reason. So that's why at times you may not remember a lot of what's said to you in some of your medical appointments. So we've looked at some of the common emotional and psychological responses to myeloma, and we've looked at why we become distressed. Now we're going to look at coping and what we can do that can be helpful. And one of the key messages in psychology is that we can influence how we feel. So how we think and what we do can affect how we feel. And what's happening in our bodies, in our nervous system, has a key role here too. So while we may have little control over some of the events that happen in our lives, we can manage our response to those happenings. So the choices we make every day in how we think about our situation or what we do in response to our situation can be helpful or unhelpful to us and can ease our distress or magnify it. So if we take thinking, for example, if you look at that circle, when we become overwhelmed or are kind of identified with our problem or identified with aspects of our illness, we can get stuck in an unhelpful pattern of thinking, like we might expect the worst to happen, or seem to notice more of the things we can't do, or we might blow things up so that they seem worse than they are. And these ways of thinking can actually make you feel worse. So if you expect the worst to happen, you'll probably end up feeling anxious, or if you keep thinking about the things you can't do, you'll probably end up feeling sad and unhappy. And if you think about, if you think that other people, for example, don't believe you or say unkind things about you, you may end up feeling cross or angry with them. So often we don't like to feel like this, so we might try to find some ways of making ourselves feel better. And unfortunately, sometimes some of the things that we do to cope can actually make us feel worse in the longer term. So we might stop doing certain things. We might avoid things we find difficult. We might give up trying to do things or spend more time on our own. We might get caught in a cycle of addictive behavior. It might be shopping or spending hours upon hours online. So these are some of the circles we can get trapped in. So this model that I'm presenting to you is called cognitive behavioral therapy model. And it can be a very empowering tool to look at the patterns between what you think, how you feel, and what you do. And it can act as a signpost to let you know where you can take action. So in coping with feelings, then, it can be helpful to be aware that our emotions are held in the body. So we can work with the body to help us cope with difficult feelings. And when we're feeling very overwhelmed, in general terms, a useful guide to remember is that we can downregulate at times when we feel overwhelmed with fear or anger. So that's using things like relaxation training or yoga, or body and breath work, meditation. Mindfulness can really help. And then for low mood, when we're under aroused, what we can do is we can upregulate using physical activity. And I know Miriam is going to be speaking to you about the benefits of exercise and movement in more detail after lunch. So what else can help regulate feelings? So when we're experiencing high levels of fear or anxiety or anger, we need some safety anchors. We need some tools to ground and resource ourselves and bring our system down. And for some people, it can be helpful to do this in a very conscious, planned, regular way. So these are some little tricks, some safety anchors that I found that can be helpful to steady yourself in times when the waves of emotion are pushing you around. And they're just suggestions. You might be drawn more to some than others. Some mightn't be for you at all. So all you need really is one technique. So something that feels right for you. So one idea is using the breath. So breathing that is long and slow and deep, and staying with that for a few minutes can really begin to calm us down and help regulate our stress levels. Grounding then is the feeling of gravity, feeling our feet on the ground and feeling the weight of your body against the earth. Another way is to explore and experience the world through your senses. So look around and notice what you can see, touch some objects around you. Get yourself here into the here and now in a very concrete way, coming out of your mind and into your body. And in doing this, you're interrupting your thoughts and stabilizing your mind. So another anchor to help regulate your feelings is to use your sense of touch. Maybe to put your hand on your heart or on your belly, or bring your fingers or hands together. And touch is really known to calm our nervous system. Or something as simple and everyday as moving, going for a walk, moving our bodies in some way, stretching, dancing even. That can really help us cope as well. And the last thing I'm going to mention is resourcing. And this means like any recollection of an image or use of words that can help to evoke a sense of safety, a sense of calmness and belonging. And what you can do is to pre-establish these so that you know when intense emotion comes, you've some way of resourcing yourself and getting a bit more stabilized. And of course, there are going to be good days and bad days. And for many people, the bad days might be triggered by a particular experience or by some symptoms or by a particular thought or worry. But remember, a key question is whether your distress is getting in the way of living your life in a meaningful way. So this can happen if someone gets really stuck in a prolonged state of low mood or anxiety or rage. So when someone comes to see us in psychology, we're looking at the frequency, the severity, and the duration of the bad days. So how many bad days out of 7? And these are key questions we ask to distinguish a normal level of response from a more problematic response. So if you or a family member are concerned that there may be a development of a deeper problem rather than normal sadness, then it's important to get professional help, to go to your GP. Don't be on your own with this. Go to your medical team, seek support from psychology or maybe counselling, support from the Irish Cancer Society, peer support through Multiple Myeloma Ireland. And sometimes what can be difficult for people in terms of coping is coping with difficult thoughts. We can get stuck in our thoughts, our minds can get tense and tight and start ruminating. We can get stuck in a unhelpful cycle of negative rumination, almost like those washing machine type thoughts that can intensify our distress even more. So at times like this, it's really helpful to just, first of all, notice when this is happening, try and catch it. So if we can step back and notice our thinking and maybe use our body or breath to create a little bit of space to do that, we can then do something about it. So even maybe writing down your thoughts so that you can see them for what they are. They're just thoughts, they're not facts. or becoming more, also by becoming more aware of your thinking, you can interrupt it in some way. You can get out of your head and focus your attention on something else of your choosing. You can distract yourself in some way. So any activity that absorbs your attention, so even things like crosswords, Sudoku, having a conversation with somebody else, things like that, something that absorbs you completely, can be really helpful in managing those unhelpful cycles of rumination, because they're really tough on us and really tough on our energy. So taking a look closer at the behavior part of the CBT model, the cognitive behavioral therapy model, and looking at the kind of different things we can do that might be helpful. When we're overwhelmed, what can happen is that we sometimes lose touch with our normal routines and activities. And this is especially so at the moment when we're having to adjust to living with coronavirus and those new ways of being. And it can be really helpful to think about having a balance between the activities we do. So doing some activities every day for pleasure, for pure enjoyment, pure fun. Having some activities also in your day that give a sense of achievement, and having something that brings a sense of connection. So looking at pleasure, something like reading a book, listening to some music, maybe watching a comedy on TV, just something simple that gives you a sense of joy, a sense of fun. And these can be like the really small everyday things that we do. And what can help is to really, really turn up the volume on those experiences, turn up the volume on your experience of those activities when you're doing them, noticing the pleasure that you get, paying attention to it, and doing this regularly. And you'll begin to set down a different neural pathway in your brain. You'll begin to retrain your brain over time to really notice the good things. It can be helpful then to look at some activities that give you a sense of achievement. So achievement could be something like gardening or fixing something, paying a bill, just getting a little bit, getting something out of the way, something that might have been hanging over you for a bit. And then looking at connection and closeness. We're social animals, so we need and we naturally crave closeness and connection with people. And this connectedness is one of the greatest antidotes to fear and distress. And I was excited to see that you're going to be having Anne Fleming coming on next to talk about support groups in Ireland for multiple myeloma, which can be a great way to meet people who are walking a similar path to you. So it's a bit more difficult then to be prescriptive around behavior in the same way that we can give specific instructions around body and breath work, or provide advice around distraction. So all of our behaviors are coping strategies. Certain behaviors can be helpful coping strategies, and they're the ones that provide relief, emotional relief, and unhelpful strategies are ones that, even though they might be pleasurable in the short term, in the longer term, they can actually serve to increase our distress. So becoming aware of what we're doing and not doing, and making choices with awareness, can support our well-being. So the key question is to ask yourself whether what I'm doing or not doing is helpful to me or unhelpful. And in answering that question, I need to look at the short-term consequences and the long-term consequences. So other people will always offer advice on what you should do, but only you will really know what's right for you. So what else can you do? So acknowledging and naming your feelings, labeling your emotions, can actually bring your thinking brain back online and can reduce your flight response. So putting feelings into words, some maybe talking things through with somebody that you trust, telling your story, maybe journaling or keeping a log of events, maybe keeping a photo diary, or some people like to paint or draw their experience. So just by naming your experience and externalizing it in some way like this, you're giving your brain a chance to process what's been happening for you. Things like accepting the things you cannot change, changing the things you can. You've heard that before, I'm sure. Taking control, reflecting on what's working for you and what isn't. So almost trying to step back every now and then and watch yourself from above almost and see what are the things that I'm doing that are helpful and working for me at the moment, keeping that perspective. So in coping and living well, in all of this, we're developing our resilience. And this is our ability to absorb high levels of disruptive change and bounce back and even excel in times of change and uncertainty without acting out in dysfunctional ways. So just to finish, nobody has to do this on their own. There are a lot of supports out there. You've got your local cancer support centre, you have the Irish Cancer Society, Multiple Myeloma Ireland is there. You've got peer and group support, individual support, psychological support and counselling. There's lots out there on the internet at the moment, lots of audio downloads. Beaumont Hospital has a great website where you can access relaxation and mindfulness exercises. Tara Brach is another website. You've got various apps out there that can be really helpful. Headspace, Calm. They can all be useful tools to have in your toolkit to access at times when you need them, and even to build into your life in a proactive way. So if anyone has any questions or comments or wants to share their own experiences of something that they found helpful in coping, we have some time now for that, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.